Let's head into the jungles of Vietnam with Chuck Norris. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do another Canon Films production, but this time we're going to Vietnam with Chuck Norris. Yes, we're talking about Missing in Action. This film came out November 16th of 1984. I know this is considered by a lot of people a clone of Rambo First Blood Part 2, and it's very similar, and there's a reason for that. We'll get into that in just a moment. It's rated R, it's an hour and 41 minutes long. It had a budget of $2.5 million, but upon release it made over $22 million, which was a huge hit for Canon Pictures at the time. An unexpected hit. As a matter of fact, they filmed this one and Part 2 back to back at the same time. Joseph Zito came in. Joseph Zito is a name we've talked about a lot lately with Invasion USA. He did that a year after this film with Chuck Norris, and he was coming off of Friday the 13th Part 4, and he did The Prowler a couple years before that. So they hired Joseph Zito to direct. This was actually going to be the sequel, Missing in Action sequel, and the beginning, which was Part 2, the prequel, was going to be Part 1. But when after looking at the films, Canon Films decided to release the second one first and make that the first one because they felt that was the better film. There's more action in it. If you've ever seen the second one, which actually the second one's not a bad film either, but the second one there's a lot less action in it until the end of the film. And I guess they were looking at the action, it was an easier sell, so they decided to release this one first, and then the second one came out a year later. The second one actually came out March 1st of 1985, so actually less than a year later, the second one came out. So they beat Rambo First Blood Part 2. They got two movies out before Rambo First Blood Part 2 even came out, because Rambo First Blood Part 2 came out in May 22nd of 85, so they beat Stallone to the punch. Now, the reason why the plots are very similar, although there is a difference, but when Stallone was shopping around the script for Rambo First Blood Part 2, he actually went to Canon Films to get the money. But he needed about $30 to $40 million to make that film, and Canon Films did not give budgets that big. Usually their sweet spot was between $2 and $6 million around that time. Now, later on, they did some bigger budgeted films, but they also had a production deal with Warner Brothers when they made Cobra with Stallone and Over the Top later on after that. So they took pieces of the idea of that script and they hired a writer, and he went off and wrote what we got in Missing in Action, which is very similar but also different at the same time, but they're always compared to each other, and that is why. And obviously Stallone was now this was a huge hit for Canon, but for Rambo First Blood Part 2 was a monstrous hit for Stallone when that came out. Now in this film we got Chuck Norris as Colonel James Braddock. We got Emmett Walsh, a great character actor. You might not know his name, but you've definitely seen this gentleman in many, many films over the years. He plays Jack Tucker, an old friend of Colonel Braddock. And then we got the great James Hong as General Tran. He is a Vietnamese general. In the beginning of this film, we see a war going on in Vietnam. We see Chuck Norris and his guys are trying to get out of there. And they're getting picked up by helicopters. And Chuck Norris ends up saving one of his guys. He gets shot, but he saves one of his guys. Well, he basically sacrifices himself to save the rest of his platoon by holding these two grenades and jumping off and taking out some Vietnamese soldiers. And he wakes up. He's having a dream. And funny enough, in his wherever he's staying, I don't know if it's his house or his hotel room, they don't really say. On the TV, the old Spider-Man cartoons from the 80s are playing. And actually, that was pretty cool. It's pretty funny, too. And he has been asked by the senator to go to Vietnam for these, like accords, like to put to rest that there is no POWs left in Vietnam. Because the Vietnamese government is saying there is no POWs, but Braddock knows they're there because he escaped from a POW camp. He was a prisoner of war for years and he broke out and escaped, which we see in Part 2, which again is not a bad film. If you ever get a chance, check that out if you like this film. So he decides to go. Now he has ulterior motives for this. He goes and he meets with this general, and there's a lot of press there, and he lined up all these Vietnamese people saying that Colonel Braddock committed all these war crimes. And Chuck Norris gets up and walks down this line of people, and the last guy says to him in Vietnamese, "I'm sorry." And Colonel Braddock says back in Vietnamese, "It's okay, I understand." He knows these people are pressured to be there by the communist regime of Vietnam. And basically he says at the end he has enough of this general shit because the general's pushing his buttons, played by James Hong, and he turns around and goes, "I was just here to kill assholes like you," and he walks out. And he goes out later that night, he sneaks out and he ends up going and killing General Tran. And he gets back to the hotel before they can catch him in the act, but they tell him he has to leave the country immediately. So he doesn't get to stay for the rest of the meetings that they're having to solve this or settle this problem of the POW issue. But he goes to Bangkok, Thailand to meet up with a friend of his, played by M. Emmett Walsh, Jack Tucker, and he wants to buy weapons, a boat, and he wants Jack to take him upriver into Vietnam so he can go find some POWs, which Jack begrudgingly agrees to, and they go upriver. This is in the second half of the film. We don't get to Vietnam until like the last 35, 40 minutes. And once we get there, he finds the POWs, and it's action scene after action. There's glorious explosions. You can tell they saved the money. Most of the money in this film was spent in the beginning of the film and at the end of the film, the last 10 minutes. And he gets some POWs, about 4 or 5 of them, and he pays this guy to pick them up in a helicopter, and they fly right into Saigon and walk into this meeting with these POWs. And the press sees it, and the Vietnamese people are like, well, and that's how the movie ends. Now, Chuck Norris made this film because his younger brother died in Vietnam in 1970. He saw this as a way to memorialize his brother. And he always saw the way the Vietnam vets were treated, and the way our government didn't allow our people to win the war. They were kind of hamstrung from winning it, and he wanted to make a positive picture on Vietnam, which Stallone did as well in his own way. Again, these are very similar films, but they are different. I like this film. Joseph Zito does a nice job with the action for the budget he had. He only had $2.5 million to pull this off. So the action's decently shot. I mean, Joseph Zito was a decent director, and he pulls off the action scenes with the little money that he had. And Chuck Norris is good as Colonel Braddock, and Emmett Walsh is fantastic. As James Hong is good in his short role. He's not in it much, maybe 10 minutes total, probably less than that total screen time. But I've always watched it. This is a film I used to watch a lot as a kid. My dad had it recorded off HBO on VHS, and I used to watch it a lot because it's a simple action movie. It's very violent, obviously. I would give Missing in Action a 7 out of 10. It's the same rating I gave The Hero and the Terror. I think it deserves that. It's a decent film. Obviously, it didn't have the production budget of Rambo First Blood Part 2. That had a $44 million budget, and obviously a bigger scope and more action even than this film. But I like this film. It's a decent little film made by Cannon. It made them a lot of money, and that's why Chuck Norris continued to work with them throughout the 80s, and they made 2 sequels. They released the prequel the year later, less than a year later. Then they made a Part 3 eventually, which Chuck Norris's brother actually directed. And also, another little bit of trivia is Jean-Claude Van Damme was a stunt double on this film. If you watch the credits, his name is in the credits. I thought that was pretty funny. Other than that, the reason why, again, I want to say this again, the reason why this one was released before the second one was because when the producers watched the film, they figured this would be an easier sell to the audiences because of the amount of action in it. And the second one does have nowhere near the amount of action in it. But I do recommend that one if you ever get a chance to check it out. Again, I gave Missing in Action a 7 out of 10. What do you think of this film? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. Hit the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video. I greatly appreciate it. I'll be back on Friday with another review. Until then, I hope you're all doing well out there, and I'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.